Greetings and welcome to part 2 of our look at the spaghetti westerns. Ooh, spaghetti westerns of 1968. I might just leave that in. With me again is Patrick Ripoll. And say hi quickly, Patrick, so we can get on with it.
Hi, quickly, Patrick, so we can get on with it.
Awesome. So in the last one, we covered Django Prepare a Coffin. We covered The Ruthless Four. We covered the Bella Starr story. We covered Johnny Hamlet. And we ended things on Beyond the Law. So today we are starting part 2 with Hate Thy Neighbor. This is by Ferdinando Baldi, who also did Django Prepare a Coffin. Its Italian title is
Odia il prossimo tuo,
which means hate your neighbor. I'm going to intro this with saying the version that is on streaming right now is cropped to 133 to 1. And this is obvious during the opening credits, but the film itself is 166 to 1. It is not a widescreen film. So you're really not missing that much if you watch this one on a streaming site. Even though it's clear that the edges of the titles are cut off, it's not a terrible. The transfer looks kind of like shit, but it's not terrible framing. And in
That's
fact,
interesting. When I was watching this, I was thinking to myself, this seems a little like old fashioned. Like, yeah, like the way it's shot and directed, it felt maybe like a Hollywood movie from the 50s. And then I said to myself, well, probably I'm just responding to it because I'm seeing a pan and scan version, when in fact it was probably some crazy ultra wide screen format in its
right.
original conception. So I'm happy to hear that I didn't miss out on half the movie.
No, and in fact, it sort of fits the movie because it feels a little like a made-for-TV movie sometimes.
Yep.
And so having it at the TV aspect ratio, I think, works.
Yeah.
This is another one of the weaker movies, I think. I think this might be the one I was least interested in overall. I guess I'll have to think about it. We'll see. Maybe I haven't rewatched some of them that we're going to do later, so maybe not. But I picked this one because I forgot that George Eastman was in almost every other movie we're talking about. And he's on the poster for this one. So like, oh yeah, we got to get a George Eastman movie in there. Completely forgetting that this is our third or fourth George Eastman movie in 6 movies. So, oops.
It's a weird one, though.
Yeah. The real thing this movie has going for it is that it just looks like a pedestrian episode of Gunsmoke. I guess Gunsmoke was black and white, so it's a color episode of Gunsmoke, but it has this weird gladiatorial battle thing that goes on, and it's so out there that it's like some of the shittier gialli that you'd watch that are kind of a boring movie but then have an outrageous death scene. And so you're like, oh, maybe there's something to this. This will be like, all right, I mean, I guess I'm not hating this movie. It's fine. And then there's a fucking gladiatorial battle.
And the fight choreography is like a martial arts movie from 1968.
Yes.
It's not as good but like it definitely doesn't feel like a Western Punch Out. It feels like a Chang Che movie all of a sudden.
Well, but that's another thing, is that obviously you would say, oh, well, the Italians were just getting out of making peplum movies and sword and sandal movies, so they were making gladiatorial stuff. And you would say, oh, this is just like one of those, but it really does feel like a Z-grade Chang Che fight, like the lord of the castle, or no, I should say the guy who's in charge of whatever. There'd be 2 warring martial arts schools, and he'll say, well, our martial artists are better than yours. So like, fine, prove it. And then Horst Frank again plays in this case, what is he, a land baron? He owns cattle or something, I don't remember. I think he's actually a cattle baron in this one. Whatever it is, he has slaves. He's in Mexico, where in this universe you're allowed slaves. I don't think that was a thing, but he has Mexican slaves, and he just for fun makes them battle to the death. But it feels like a warring martial arts school has put their best warrior forward,
especially because the weapon is that iron claw that you will see in those movies.
And so they have this, and then they have an arm guard that's very basket like, which is again very martial arts. There's a lot of baskety shields in martial arts movies, and then an iron claw on the other hand. And so you're supposed to block with your basket and slash with your claw. And then whoever wins the fight is handed a gun with 1 bullet in the chamber. And I wrote down I think they have 5 chances to kill their opponent with the gun.
I think it's
It's like
three. I think they have a
3.
50% chance basically. Or no, because they spin it after every
They
shot.
have
So
to
it's really a
spin
1 in 6 shot every
Yeah, they
time.
have to spin the cylinder every time. It's like Russian roulette if you're shooting the other person, I guess. And if
It's
you win
13 Tezemetti.
yeah, yeah. And, yeah,
Anyone who
before
remembers
it's
that
time.
movie.
Before it's time. Yeah, yeah, I remember watching that. If you win, you get sent free. And I really, even though I'd seen this movie before, I was totally expecting Horst Frank to shoot the dude in the back as he was leaving. But he doesn't. He does let the guy go free. They like he is a proper Roman lord who allows his slave gladiators to go free. And it's so funny because it's such a shit arena. It's basically, I guess you put your sheep in it. It's like a little sheep, a round sheep thing, and
Yeah.
Frank is on a slightly elevated chair, and his wife, who is this like quiet psychopath, I guess. She reminds me of Calvin Candy's sister in Django Unchained.
Well, that was going to be
uh
my next question. My next question was, do you think that Quentin Tarantino was referencing Hate Thy Neighbor when he made up the Mandingo fighting thing from Django Unchained?
so here's my thought. I think it's possible that Tarantino was inspired by this movie, but I assume it was partial inspiration and maybe half forgotten because it's a very forgettable movie,
Sure.
and because Mandingo fighting is a central aspect of the novel of the same name, which was turned into a popular movie. Mandingo had a sequel called Drum that was even more about that.
Ah, I did
Uh,
not realize this.
and Tarantino has gone out of his way to talk about Mandingo as a movie he's paying homage to, because Mandingo is this Dino De Laurentiis trying to do Gone with the Wind, but it's so patently offensive because the book is so patently offensive. It's an interesting movie. It's about the main character who does the quote Mandingo fighting, which I can't find any proof of that being a term before the book. I actually kind of researched this. I am positive that Southern uh, Confederates would make their slaves fight each other at some point. That just seems like something that must have happened. But I don't know where the term Mandingo fighting comes from. But I could see Tarantino connecting dots between that movie and westerns because he had seen this movie. And this seems like the kind of movie he would dig up, like he has like a 16 millimeter print in his yard or his closet, I guess. I don't know why I said yard.
Sure.
So I don't know. I think there's a good possibility, and I think that if you interviewed him, he would say, "Oh yeah, I guess so." But he did have those specific things in mind with his thing. What is the plot? I didn't even read the plot of this one because I can't
Hate Thy
remember.
Neighbor is a movie about a man whose brother is murdered in cold blood, and the town basically all turns their back on helping this guy because they don't want to get involved. He gets killed, and his wife gets killed, and his son probably would have gotten killed too if they knew that his son was in the stagecoach, but they don't. So the son is still alive. And what he was killed over was this treasure map. Now, George Eastman, who is doing the dirty work of what's his name, the German resting cattle baron face guy,
Frank,
Horst Frank,
Mr. Frank.
he's doing his dirty work. He takes this map and he tears it in two, and he has half, and the cattle baron has half. Is this how maps work? No. Would this is there any sense to this? No. Why did he do it in the first place? Hard to say. So it is a sort of a three-way power struggle between George Eastman, who is the henchman, but he wants access to the money and power that Horst Frank has. Horst Frank doesn't want to give up any of that, so he doesn't want to accept George Eastman as a equal partner. So they're having a little bit of a power struggle, and then you have this guy whose brother was killed by them over this treasure map, and he's coming for a very leisurely revenge. The issue is the movie does not care about the protagonist at all and finds him really
No,
boring.
no,
It is
Eastman is the main character in a lot of ways.
There are just long stretches of the movie where the ostensible protagonist of the story is not present, and you're just sort of like, okay, I guess he's sort of also he is not on a quest for blood or whatever. He very much makes a point to not murder people. in a very unsatisfying way. This whole movie's very unsatisfying and kind of nonsensical, which is like that nonsense is how you get to the loopy Shaw Brothers gladiator fights, or the insane James Bond villain torture device that they set
That
up
was
for
the other
George
note.
Eastman later.
Which is another thing that makes Eastman the lead character, because the lead character is the one who gets insanely tortured in these movies.
Right.
And it's so funny because I mean, talk about scenes that don't make sense. So they the Frank, whose name is probably Frank, he's German, it's probably Frank, but I'm
Sure.
probably gonna continue to call him Frank. Yes, so he Frank has hung George Eastman. Oh, they beat him up and they hang him upside down, which is already awful. I can't imagine being upside down. But they do it over a pit of snakes. And then they put a cage at the top of the rope and cover it in honey and put some rats in there. And the rats are chewing away at the rope. It's like something out of a Nazi exploitation movie, honestly. The thing that doesn't make sense is they leave. They just leave him to die, but they still needed info. And it's like, I guess they're implying they're going to come back later and then he'll be more willing to talk, but
There's
he's not
one
going to
guy
let.
who's left behind. So they're like, by the way, this dude says anything, write it down.
And so the hero comes and rescues him, and there's like a, it's a little good, the bad and the ugly, where there's like a truce looking for the gold kind of situation. It is actually, now that I think about it, that's the good, the bad and the ugly, is each one of them has part of a map. And good, the bad and the ugly, each part of them, one knows where the gravestone is and the other one knows what the name is on the gravestone.
Okay.
i
So
think that
this is what they're going for.
I think this is what they're going for, and
It
I
is the
just thought of that.
least epic good, the bad, the ugly you could ever
Yes,
conceive of.
but would the good, the bad, and the ugly be better if there was gladiatorial fights?
Probably.
There's even a spot when they get taken in by the northern people where they're taken prisoner and beat up. Could have made them beat up each other.
Yeah.
Ways to improve. I think that part of the problem is George Eastman is pretty good in this again, at least fun to watch. And the other guy is played by oh, what's his name? Spiros Focus, who is a Greek-born actor who's known outside of Greece for being in Visconti's Rococo and His Brothers. He's in Shaft in Africa. He's in the nunsploitation movie Flavia the Heretic, and he's in American movies like Jewel of the Nile and Rambo 3, and he's in an episode of Murder, She Wrote, if that means anything. But he, I guess, is fine in those movies, but man, he sucks in this.
He's very boring.
Holy shit.
Boring on the page, boring on the screen.
I don't know if it was a error with. I mean, he made enough Italian movies. He must have been able to communicate in Italian. It can't be that he was. There's one that came out recently from Mondo Macabro called The Fear, which is a Greek horror movie that was really cool. So look for that. The Fear, Greek movie, 1966. But yeah, he's super boring here. Almost anybody could have done better. And I think that Baldi realized what was going on and just sort of refocused the movie on Frank and Eastman. I will say I'm going to go into Eastman a little bit here since I don't have anything else to talk about because we've been mentioning him in the previous podcast and stuff. His given name is Luigi Montefiore, and he is a really fascinating guy. He was trying to make it as the hero type, but he's just so large. I'm sorry, I said 6'8" in the last one. Apparently, he's actually 6'9".
Jesus.
So he's, god damn, he is. I feel like I'm tall, but he is 6 inches taller than me at minimum. And he's wearing cowboy boots on top of that, so that's another two. He's like 7 feet at with the boots on. But somebody finally figured out he looks really scary, and so they started making him bad guys. But most of us know him for being the groaning invincible killer in Joe D'Amato's Anthropophagist and Absurd.
That's yep. Those are the two movies I associate him with.
Yeah, and so at the end of Anthropophagus, he famously eats his own intestines. Great stuff. But he was also in some of D'Amato's hardcore movies. So he's been. I've never seen them, but I assume he's actually having sex, which is not typical that you have an actor who has such a long storied career also be in sex films because his friend is making them basically and needs an actor. But when
You know what? I might have to seek these out because again, the man's 6'9". That's
yeah. Well, Some of the ones he's in include Porno Holocaust, Erotic Nights of the Living Dead, and the fantastically titled Dog Lay Afternoon.
These all sound like bangers to me. No
Dog
pun intended.
Lay Afternoon. But what? Yeah. So his whole thing is he really wanted to be a writer, and he became really prolific. And he uses his real name, so you don't notice it. It's not credited as George Eastman, but he wrote a lot of D'Amato scripts. But then he went on to do he wrote The Unholy Four. He wrote Keoma, which we've been bringing up a lot, which is fucking amazing. And he wrote Cemetery Man, Michele Soavi's first movie, Stage Fright, which is a really fantastic kind of slasher, actiony slasher movie that I highly, highly recommend. And then he also wrote Soavi's Michael Mann-esque cop miniseries called Una Bianca. And then at one point, he actually was able to write and direct a movie called Metamorphosis, which was produced by Italians, but it was shot in Virginia with American actors. So it had a half decent home video release in the US. So the Joe average horror fan from, the 80s and 90s actually knows him as the writer director of Metamorphosis, not as this nearly 7 foot tall uh, man mountain of an actor. I just find him fascinating, and he's getting up there in age, and so I wish someone would do like a full, because he's happy to do special feature, especially the movies he wrote. He's all over Blu-ray extras, and I just want one of these guys who has the money and the connections to make a full-on documentary about his life, because he's just a fascinating guy.
Yeah. Too bad the
Um,
movie is not.
yeah, I think I like Roberto Rizzo's character, and this was his last role. He plays a sarcastic credenza playing mortician. He tries to inject some color. I feel like, I know this probably isn't the case, but I feel like they also put him in the movie to make Focas's character a little more interesting because he has a sidekick now.
Yeah. That's it.
like
Would have
like
been pretty dire if it was just him.
maybe at some point he was just in that one scene where he gets information from him, and then they're like, fuck, this isn't working, you got to be in other scenes, buddy, got to bring you on.
I think other than the gladiator fight, the scene in this movie that I like the most is when the coffin maker takes out a little coffin that he keeps his flask in, and he
Yeah,
sets out a little shot glass, and then he just drinks out of the flask, and then puts the cap back on, and then puts the shot glass, and
yeah, it's a good bit. It's like
it's very funny.
it's very silent film, you know
Yeah,
like, yeah. The main title song is called Two Friends, but I swear to God, he says Three Friends. I was listening so hard. I'm like, it's not a good transfer. I actually watched the streaming version because my DVD looked that much worse. And so it's a little buzzy, but I swear to God, he yells Three Friends. And it's sung by Raul, who, like Madonna, has just one name. It's a crooner kind of thing. It was very funny. I might use that at the end of this podcast, actually.
it's also an ending where the hero gets his ultimate revenge, and then goes, "The real revenge would be justice, so I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to bring you back to the sheriff."
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
didn't you just spend the beginning of this movie beating up the sheriff because the sheriff is a piece
Yeah.
of shit who doesn't do his job?
It would have,
Like, now all of a
imagine if,
sudden the legal system is your friend? I don't know.
and he has a gladiatorial fight with Eastman and survives, and then Eastman's killed by Frank. Again, it's just like so many reasons that we want to see Frank absolutely obliterated.
Yeah.
Like, he should have been thrown in to the gladiatorial pit with Eastman. That would have been the most satisfying ending, to see giant man Eastman destroy Cattle Baron Face, just rip him to shreds. It's actually not that violent a movie considering how much violence occurs. It's a little disappointing from that aspect too. It's not very bloody. My only other note is that one of Frank's thugs has the single biggest and fakest looking hat I've ever seen in a movie. It wasn't supposed to be a gag. Like, it looks like a foam novelty hat you get at a football game.
That's
Um,
pretty
and,
good.
and then in the next shot, his stuntman is not wearing the same hat as he gets punched. And everybody is decked out in a big hat. Like, his whole gang is like sombrero ass hat gang. But there's just this one shot with this foamy ass looking hat that just blew my mind. And I should have gotten a screen cap of it because it's so strange. But that's it. That was the another moment that really woke me up watching this movie. Is what the fuck is that hat? Was my that was my that was my.
I miss this one. I
It
must
goes by real fast. It goes by real fast. Any other notes on this
nah,
gladiatorial masterpiece?
nah, it's a bad one. It's
Yeah, it's
people should skip it.
yeah, unfortunately. Well, then let's move on to a good one,
Yeah.
or at least an interesting one. I
So
don't know if
good trash.
good trash. Yeah, this Black Jack, which Italian title is also Black Jack, but has the subtitle
Un uomo per 5 vendette.
One Man for Five Vendettas. This is from Gianfranco Baldanello, and this is usually covered as a low budget western, is how it's usually mentioned in these books, and kind of glazed over. And it doesn't look that much more low budget than some of the other ones, so I find that interesting. But it's shot in Israel instead of Spain, which does give it a sort of drier look. You know, it's like drier and paler desert out there. The Blu-ray I have, you gave to me as a gift. I don't know if you even remember that.
I do. I do. I was like, why does blackjack sound familiar? And I looked it up and I'm like, oh yeah, I bought that for you for Christmas one year.
Yeah, and so I had you got me the German Blu-ray, which is Auf die Knie Django, which is a cooler title, which is On Your Knees Django. But Django is misspelled on the spine, so it reads Dango. And Dango, you know the theme song for Django. I just keep thinking Dango, and it just kills me every time. And it's one of those things that like Christine doesn't find funny, only I find funny. It's
Yeah, I've been there. I've been there. Smokey and Bandit.
Smokey and Bandit, man. No, that's not even.
That's a Patrick Gabe inside joke there.
Yeah, we're not going to explain it. So
Nah,
there. Um,
you could probably work it out. Anyway, Blackjack. This movie's insane.
yeah, it starts really by the numbers, which I think is its real masterstroke.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I want to compare it to something like it doesn't go this far, so take this with a grain of salt. But it's a little bit like if you were watching Audition for the first time, didn't know what you were in for, and were like a little bit bored by this sort of semi artsy but not very interesting romantic drama, and then suddenly get kicked in the balls when it turns into a horror movie. It's not that extreme, but it does have a little bit of like, okay, I know where this is going, and then it goes dark. It's really mean spirited. You hear a lot about how dark and brutal spaghetti westerns are, but for the most part, they're not. Like you have Django, where a guy is force fed his ear, yeah, but most of them are pretty bright as far as their content, you know. And this one is just
They're more cynical than their American counterparts, but they're not
yeah.
necessarily a lot more violent.
But the thing is that as soon after this, American westerns got incredibly bleak and like you have stuff like Soldier Blue. I don't know if you've ever seen that, and The Hunting Party, both of which have Candice Bergen in them.
Olzana's Raid is a wild
Yeah,
one.
it's just really nihilistic movies, and I think those all come out of how popular The Wild Bunch was, which is a reasonably nihilistic movie. And I think that this is a case of the Italians being ahead of the game, but unfortunately, it was a movie that wasn't that popular, so it doesn't get any credit for that. It's not that.
And the way I want to frame it is like in the modern cult movie sort of landscape, it's sort of a movie like a law-abiding citizen, the Gerard Butler movie, where it's
Yeah,
like guy is wronged, but then his revenge is so wildly over the top that he is no longer the wronged innocent. He is just like it's just like, oh, they double crossed Jason Voorhees, actually. They double crossed the Joker, you know?
it's like the vengeance movies that Park Chan-wook made. It's got that kind of that Korean mid 2000s revenge is kind of cool, but it's also wrong and will ruin your soul
But yeah,
kind of
well,
thing.
I feel like those movies are mournful, and this movie is like gleeful.
Until the end. I think the end is, well, Alex Cox compares it to House of Usher visually, and
Huh.
I see it. The end of the movie is like House of Usher, where he's dead and the building crumbles around him. And I think that they were going for certain gothicisms. The basic idea here is that there is a heist and he is the one who planned it, so he gets a bigger cut of the money. But when they get there, the guys who pulled it off want more money, and he takes this opportunity to kill a bunch of them, take all the money, and run away, and then is surprised when he's betrayed and left for dead, and his sister murdered,
Sexually assaulted and murdered.
murdered. And we'll get to that in a bit. I think that's its own thing. But he is already a fucking asshole because he cheated these guys out of their money, and it's like, what did he expect? And the thing
Also,
that
the beginning of the movie, he has this weird incestuous relationship with his sister that is like,
yes, I thought I seen this movie twice, and I forgot it wasn't his wife or girlfriend. It is his sister. I forgot that part.
so he's just an off-putting human.
Yeah. And so when he's hurt, he has his leg permanently injured, so he is limping. And I thought this up, but then I double checked, and Cox totally mentions this too. He kind of becomes Frankenstein, and he hobbles around like Frankenstein. And then the way he has these elaborate revenge schemes, a lot of it involves him being out of sight laughing, which is very Phantom of the Opera to me. And so they're definitely playing with gothic horror stuff without looking like a gothic horror movie, I think is the idea I got from it. But he has, the Jason Voorhees thing is good because he is elaborate in his schemes. I guess not as elaborate as the guy in Old Boy, Jesus Christ, but it's approaching that level in the way he's gonna get all these guys. There's one scene in a dark, smoky mine that's a little bit My Bloody Valentine-esque. It kind of looks like a Hammer Dracula movie for a minute.
The most unsettling revenge he gets is one where he doesn't do the dirty work himself.
Yeah, he plans out. He makes a plan for he brings along a guy that he could have killed, and then allows the guy to think he's run away, and has his friend shoot him by saying it's him. Yeah.
No, I was thinking about the village.
Oh yeah, the first time. Oh yeah, yeah. So he says, "Hey, $20 to whoever kills this guy," and the whole village goes, "Awesome," or $100, and they all murder the shit out of this guy, and he keeps like almost getting away. And
Yeah, there's like really blood curdling screams as this like crowd of people beat this man to death.
and then again, the actual on screen blood is minimal, but like they have shreds of his clothes flying up, implying that they're ripping him to pieces, basically.
Right.
And there's a funny kind of subtext to that scene where that man is already threatening to kill a guy for sleeping with his daughter, who seems of age, and so there's this great shot after the dad's been killed where the daughter and the boy are back in bed together looking happy. And I liked that touch that, like, yeah, well, in this case, this man probably needed to die, and this village is happier without him.
There's another interesting aspect to it, which is that he is maimed by the gang when they catch up with him and get their revenge, and he spends the rest of the movie walking with a cane.
Right, and that's the part where I think he's like Frankenstein, because he has to waddle, and he has got scars on his faces that kind of look Frankenstein-esque. But he's definitely been made into a monster by what's happened.
Except he's an asshole who's been made into a monster.
Yeah, his outside matches his insides now.
Right. There's a good stunt where someone is dragged by a horse for a while,
and he shoots, the guy is trying to run with the horse, and so he shoots his leg out. That's the most gruesome thing. And then the guy can't run with the horse anymore and gets strangled to death. That's like you'd see in like a modern movie.
The climax of the movie is the part where it does become kind of a Old Boy sort of a situation.
Yeah. There's this other character who, honestly, the first time I watched the movie, I couldn't figure out who he was, but it's the sister's husband, young husband.
My notes, the very last note is, oh, that guy is that sister's husband. So
and he's just sort of been hanging around the whole time. He doesn't have much to do. And because his wife was raped and murdered, Jack tries to force him to rape and murder. It ends with him deciding not to do that, so there's a slightly happy ending. So the thing here is that spaghetti westerns generally were not super racist against Native. They just weren't in the movies, as we said before.
Yeah, I think in the first episode we talked about the relative lack of indigenous people in these movies means there's a relative lack of racist portrayals of indigenous people.
And I think this is less about the Italian filmmakers being anti-racist and more about the fact that these movies are revisionist westerns, and the pre-spaghetti revisionist westerns were rejecting that savage Indian idea already. And so I think that it just wasn't cool in general, is
Right.
my theory on that. So not necessarily giving them benefit of the doubt so much here, as this is just not something they're interested in portraying. However, this one has a very uncomfortable Indian stereotype whose character traits are that he doesn't talk, he covets a blonde white woman, he betrays the antihero's trust, he is generally savage, and off screen rapes and scalps the sister.
And he's a good tracker is originally like what he's
Yeah,
hired for.
it's like every stereotype in the book,
It's not
and
so
none of
it's
them are
not so
good.
great.
And none of them are good. He is sort of, if you could look past all that, he's kind of a compelling villain because he doesn't talk, and that he's sort of like a Terminator in, to a certain degree. But you can't really look past what it is. The one thing this does lead to is that Jack strangles him to death with the braided hair from his dead sister's scalp, which is a kind of cool
It's something.
murder. It's a kind of cool murder idea that,
but that's the kind of movie it is they
yeah,
sat down and they said, what are some cool murders? You know,
yeah,
the famous story about George Romero calling up Tom Savini and being like, I need you to brainstorm some ways to kill people. Like, that is
yeah,
how this movie was written.
yeah. And which I guess connects it to the Gialli in a certain way, because a lot of those were written that way. This is also an uncommonly good English dub. I noticed that you're basically getting, this is another Woods performance, and you're basically getting his full performance for better or worse. I think it's usually good. It's a little bit, his version of hysterical is a little goofy.
There's a
His,
moment where he is like in a canyon and he's like mocking and taunting them because he's watching them and they don't know where he is, but they know that he can, you know, get the jump on him at any time. And all I could think about was the scene in the Simpsons episode where Milhouse puts on camouflage and then imagines that he can go invisible, and he's like, "Over here, fellas!" Like there's something a little bit silly about that evil laugh of his.
again, I think to me that is a sort of Phantom of the Opera thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. I
but
agree.
and it works sometimes, and sometimes it's just like it's not working, but it feels like his actual performance, even though all these movies were shot without sound, so he is dubbing his own performance, and I think he's dubbing it well. And some of the other actors are also dubbing themselves in English, you could tell. And it's also one of those movies where it's very clear everybody's speaking English on set, because even when the voices are wrong, lip sync is generally similar. So I think a lot of people get pulled out of these movies, because these movies and a lot of Italian movies, because they can't handle the lip sync. Same thing with Hong Kong action movies of a certain era, where they, even if you're watching the Mandarin version, lip sync's still off because they shot without sound, and it just wasn't part of the process for them. So if you're not used to that kind of thing, I think Blackjack is one of the few ones that won't throw you off too much.
That was
Along
the
with
first hurdle I had to overcome to become an Italian horror fan. And I think there's probably still recordings of me out there from 10 years ago being like, yeah, that's kind of cool or whatever, but it's also so stupid. And I just couldn't get into a lot of Italian horror movies because that lip sync was such a big challenge. But, you know, at
it
this
is,
point, I just sort of, it is what it is.
and to me it's sort of like a different version of subtitles at this point. Like I know, and I get excited when I realize, oh, the guy's dubbing himself. Like once you see a Franco Nero movie where he dubbed himself versus one where he didn't, it's such an improvement. Even though his accent is never, they always wrote into the script, later scripts like Companeros and The Mercenary, which we're going to talk about way later. They would write into scripts, oh, he has an accent, he's from somewhere else, because he wanted to dub his own performance in English. And it makes a difference because he has a very specific voice. Anybody who's seen John Wick 2 knows his voice probably from that. Oh, or what's it? Die Hard 2. Freedom, not yet.
My only other note I have here for Blackjack is that this is the other, on the last episode, we talked about Bella Star's story and how their bank heist involved a chimney.
Yeah,
This is the other chimney based
yeah.
bank heist. they do a reverse Santa Claus where they have to like let down a little bit of rope and then someone ties all of the loot to the rope and then it gets pulled back up the chimney. I thought the bank heist at the beginning of this movie really sucked, and for a while there I was like, I think I'm in for a stinker here,
Yeah.
because it is that thing you talked about where it starts off somewhat innocuously and like so many of these movies before it finds its own absolutely crazed self-identity.
Well, and most spaghetti westerns would not show you that first half. They would just introduce him as pissed off, and then we would get little bits of why he's pissed off in very short flashbacks. So it's even structured differently. I wrote. I'm not familiar with Baldanello's other work. He made this and another western called This Man Can't Die, which was also released in '68, and I haven't seen that one. It seems like he made pretty C grade stuff, and he made a lot of erotic comedies. He made a single giallo entitled Yellow, The Cousins, and even in the Italian cut, it's called Yellow and not Giallo, which I thought was weird. And then he made a Euro spy movie called Danger Death Ray that is his most famous movie because it was covered on Mystery Science Theater 3000, which is the case with a lot of Italian genre directors. Are like, oh, you'll go on Letterboxd and it will show their movies in order of popularity, and you're like, why the fuck is that one the first one? And then you'll go, oh, because it was on Mystery Science Theater
Yeah.
3000.
Mario Bava was able to transcend that, but
Yeah,
a lot of them
yeah,
weren't.
yeah. But I mean, if you would have had a Letterbox in 1990, it probably would have been
Oh yeah,
just
that's
giving that
possible.
belt. I was gonna say part of the reason I thought this was so well made is because the cinematographer was good, but I haven't seen any of his other movies either. So I think it was just people came together and it looked good.
I think it just has conviction. I think it just like it
Yeah,
really leans into the trashiness. It's the
yeah.
trashiness is not undercut by like, oh, but then there's this other subplot where he's like teaching a little boy how to fish or something. Like, no, it's just nasty.
It gets a boost. Lalo Gori did the score, and he does a sort of, I think it's like a jazzy pop. It feels like something you would see in a Euro spy movie, like a Bond ripoff, or like
Mm,
a non-Western heist movie. It's a little more brassy than you expect from a Western. But then at some points he uses a really famous classical piece that I think is Holst, but I don't know how to look up. I don't know how you hum something into a micro. I don't think they have any technology where you can hum and it tell you, but it's a da 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 da, whatever that one's called.
sure.
They mix that one in with the when he's starting to get dark. Not a super special movie, but a pretty cool movie. And yeah, if you want something meaner and trashier, it's a good choice.
It's one of those things where it's like we're now like halfway through the second episode of these movies or whatever, and we are sort of seeing like even within the narrow field of Italian made westerns in 1968, there's a lot of different personalities that come out and a lot of different approaches. And if you are going to be a person who watches 15 of these movies in rapid succession to prepare for a podcast, you really maybe disproportionate. Like, this is not necessarily a movie I would just randomly suggest for someone for their Saturday night or
Yeah.
whatever. I don't think it's like a must see in that way, but like as far as if you're going to see a bunch of spaghetti westerns, you should also see Blackjack because it's just so unlike so many of the other ones.
Yeah, I feel like you have a list of all the must-see spaghetti westerns. It's like number 60 on the
Yeah,
list.
sure.
Maybe well, we'll say like number 45. I bet it's about number 45 is what I would, just off the top of my head. Something like that. It's in the middle. Actually, it's not even the middle. That's still the front. There are so many of these movies. Like we said, there was like arguably 100 this year alone. So
Right.
who knows? Who knows? All right. Up next is A Sky Full of Stars for a Roof, directed by Giulio Petroni, not Petrioni. God, these guys have similar sounding names, and I'm no good at it. The
Mhm.
Italian title is,
E per tetto un cielo di stelle.
which has a ... so it's more like and a sky full of stars for a roof, which the title kind of promises this kind of grand visual experience with lots of wide vistas, but I think it's supposed to be more about romanticizing life on the lam. Was the general idea I got.
Mhm.
This is our first Giuliano Gemma movie, or Gemma, but Gemma, I believe, is Italian. He was an already nominally successful actor when he had his first big Western hit, which was Duccio Tessari's A Pistol for Rango in 1965, which is only 1 year after Fistful of Dollars. And I think you can make the argument that he is actually the biggest star to come out of spaghetti westerns outside of Eastwood, Van Cleef, and maybe Franco Nero. He's kind of charming, handsome guy, and he really flexed his acting muscles during the 70s. But his earlier spaghetti performances are kind of a little samey. We were talking about The Day of Anger, where he gets the full Pygmalion, and he's that one was a little bit more against type.
Right.
Tessari didn't direct a Western in 1968, or else I would have probably picked one of his because he's also an important figure. But the two of them made a gangster movie called The Cat that same year. I will say about Gemma is he's not the greatest comedic lead. He's talented and good dramatically and charming, but he's not the funniest guy in the world on his own. And then the secondary lead is Swiss-born German actor Mario Adorf, who is definitely one of those faces that you recognize when you see it, and you start to see it a lot. And he was in quite a few Italian films, including westerns and gialli. He was in The Tin Drum, Major Dundee, the Peckinpah movie. And then he's sort of famous for turning down a big role, an unnamed big role in The Godfather. And I always remember him as the weirdo shut-in artist who eats cats from The Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
I watched this after I watched Ace High,
Mhm.
and to me, he gave off Bud Spencer vibes.
Yeah, he's like a shorter, grosser Bud Spencer kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's a more pathetic Bud Spencer. I think that's kind of how he got his. I think that was on purpose. I think Spencer was popular enough that they were trying to pick someone who was a little like Spencer. He's a good galoot, though. In the first part, we talked about the sort of idea of a mentor Western, I believe, which was a thing that sort of started because Lee Van Cleef was a sort of mentor to Clint Eastwood in For a Few Dollars More. But the thing that Italians also love is comedy duos. And I've never really looked into it, but I assume that's because Abbott and Costello and Laurel and Hardy were really popular in the early days of film. That's just an assumption I'm making. I forget the name of the duo that was popular around this time. Fulci directed a bunch of their movies. Franco and Ciccio. Really, really, really obnoxious movies. Poor Fulci can't make them any better. But this one reminds me more of an attempt at doing Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. This is still a little bit ahead of the Bud Spencer, Terrence Hill movies, which I think we'll talk about more a little bit down the line in this episode. I usually find this brand of Italian comedy really annoying, but I think the mugging is kept to sort of a minimum here. And there's they lean into the silent film slapstick thing more than the burping, farting, googly eyes thing.
Right. The humor here is broad, but it doesn't feel like clownish.
Yeah, and it really did remind me of better silent movies. This was the last minute thing. We were gonna watch one called I Want Him Dead, but I realized I'd never seen this one. It sounded sort of interesting, and we didn't have a Gemma movie, and he was like the one important figure other than Eastwood that we didn't have anything covering, so I moved it to this one. And I think that it's a kind of overlong. It's actually quite long for a comedy, not as long as Ace High, which we'll cover in a minute, but it's overlong and it's kind of listless. There's very little momentum, but at the same time, I originally watched this directly after watching Blackjack, which is really mean spirited and has quite a bit of momentum. So it was kind of a nice antidote breather for me, in that order at least.
For me, this mostly reminded me of the movies that Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor made together.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
The specific comedy dynamic of these two people who are these sort of reluctant partners who constantly get on each other's nerves, or it's really the one who's getting on the other's nerves and the one who's getting the other into all these scrapes and stuff, really reminded me of a movie like Stir Crazy. And then also a lot of those Wilder Pryor movies had a like episodic feel. They're like, so you watch a Stir Crazy and it kind of just feels like here's 15 ideas for comedic scenes we had that we strung together, more than a story. And that's definitely this movie. This movie is just like, well, that scheme didn't work. How about this scheme? Oh, that didn't work. Okay, how about this scheme?
And I think that the fact that the two leads have genuine chemistry is what keeps it from feeling like a droning kind of thing, because a lot of that's actually a issue with a lot of the later, like the Terrence Hill comedies, where it really is just 15-minute scenes strung together, and it gets really annoying because there's no real connective tissue. This one actually kind of tries too hard to have connective tissue in the end. There's part of me that thinks we don't need to find out that Gemma's actually a secret badass, that I'm
It
just not particularly interested in that part of the story.
it's almost like a late stage reveal that it's like, oh, this is going to be an action movie, because there's
Oh
almost
yeah. Oh,
no
by the
action in
way,
this movie.
yeah. Oh, by the way, there's this thing. I didn't really describe the plot. The thing that's really it starts really nice. There's a sequence where there has been a stagecoach robbery, a pretty violent one, and both of these guys, separate from each other, happen upon it and help each other bury the victims. Just out of in Adolf's case, just out of the kindness of his heart. In Gemma's case, there's a connection because it was his gang that did it, but he doesn't know these people or anything like that. And it's got these really good Ennio Morricone heartstring pulling tones that are really helping set this sort of sadness that kind of cuts through some of the comedy, where them being kind of pathetic is one thing, but them also being a little bit sad is another one. I think that really makes it work, especially the Adolf character. And so yeah, once we've come around, and the Gemma's character keeps trying to come up with all these schemes to make money, and Adolf gets more and more tied up in them. There's a certain dynamic. You're right with the with what you were saying, but I feel like there's other dynamics, like almost a Looney Tunes thing, where someone keeps getting someone involved in schemes they don't really want to be a part of. Some of them are pretty funny, and they're also like refreshingly, again, after Blackjack and it's rapes and murders and heel turns and stuff. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of low stakes adventure, with them just sort of traveling from town to town. It has it's called A Sky Full of Stars for Roof, and it doesn't have a lot of vista shots, but it does have them moving from town to town, which is kind of refreshing, because so many of these movies, because of Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More, are really focused on being on a set and being basically almost a play with action scenes.
I will say the one sequence with the widow does have a little bit of a sexual assault
It
angle
does.
to it, where she's just sort of like, no, please stop, as he's kissing her, and then it cuts away, and then when it cuts back, she's like, okay, well, I'm into it. Like, it's one of those that I was just sort of like, this is not the tone of this movie. This is like, this movie is so silly, and then all of a sudden there's like a woman saying no as a man forces himself onto her, and I'm like, oh, I'm
Well,
not
and
having fun anymore.
it's a little extra weird too, because to me it seems like the joke they're setting up is that she's actually the one, like he thinks he's getting one over on her, but she's actually invited him in because she's horny, because she's been married to this old guy who
Right,
can't put out. And so there's little hints that like he's the one being used here.
right.
I don't know if they maybe thought that having her protest was like it was like a joke about her pretending to be a lady or something. It's sexist either way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it is a little off. I'll agree with that. And it is a kind of cute joke up until that point too. Actually, I just watched. It's going to be. We should have covered them in a row, but it's too late now. Ace High actually has a very similar plot that's a lot less rewarding than this one, I think, as far as the dynamic between the characters. Whereas this one has two characters I like. That one has one character I like and two I do not like.
I think that might be just a difference between me and you, because I'm really into Ace High, but we'll get there when we get there.
Okay, cool. I might have been thinking about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid just because that's one of my favorite movies, but there was precedent for, I can't remember what it's called, but there was this sort of spaghetti western ripoff semi sequel, and they use the names Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid throughout other spaghetti westerns like as alternate titles and stuff like that. And I like the idea in this that connects those two. Another idea that connects those two is that they're constantly running from a group of men,
Yeah.
but they're, in this case, they are criminals, not I'm trying to remember if it's actually the Pinkertons in Butch Cassidy. I can't remember. It's a Pinkerton like group of lawmen.
I've still never seen Butch Cassidy and the
Oh.
Sundance Kid.
You know, it's one of those things that you're like, you've heard about it too much now, and it's not going to live up to expectations, but it's genuinely one of my favorite movies since childhood. You know, when did your parents ever sit you down and make you watch movies that they like?
My parents didn't like art.
Oh, okay. Well, my parents weren't into weird movies or even like super highbrow movies, but they had movies they liked and they'd make me watch them. And Butch Cassidy was one that I just was like, oh my God, I love this movie. Even as a younger kid, I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
That's like not me being like a boomer film fan. That's me being like a kid who grew up with this movie. So
sure.
it's on my mind more often, but it was a huge hit across the world. So I think there's a little bit of that. The bad guys are kind of cartoonishly mean, which I think they mean it to be funny, but it actually comes across as kind of fucked up a couple times.
Well, that opening is like really harrowing. That opening where they kill, because it's like very specifically they kill the woman too. Like, you know, it's like there's no, and it's just, and then at the end they're just sort of like, oh, he's not there, and then they just sort of walk off without even taking anything. It's just sort of like a bunch of dead people for no reason.
Yeah. And then later on when they're like in the town and they're kind of they're being scary in town, they're pretty intense bad guys. The main bad guy is Federico Boito, who ends up in a number of these movies, kind of all in, I think he was in all 4 of the movies we're going to next cover, in some way or another. He's just got a great asshole fit. He looks like a jock, and he was in a lot of Mario Bava movies as not that kind of character. And he's apparently in the sequel to Superfly, which I've never seen. Some of the schemes that I like is the original one where he sets up with his friends a fake bank in a ghost town to scam Adolf out of his money. And then,
I was waiting to see more of these partners that he partnered with to steal.
Yeah, that was weird, right? Like, he's
this loner who's just like, well, I guess I'm gonna ramble on down the road, and you're like, okay, so where are these friends coming from? When did you split up this money?
Well, and then there's like an ongoing thing where there's a he travels with a guy who runs a scam freak show, and the original joke is no one really seems interested in it. There's a quote unquote mermaid who sits bored and knitting, and nobody is paying to see it. And then he, for some reason, and I don't know if he's lying about this, but he spends the money he stole from Adolf making the traveling mermaid show better. And it's like those characters show up again later in the movie and of course get brutally murdered because, again, the villain scenes definitely feel like they're out of a different film. But there's this sort of strange sense of like, he's not, the Gemma character is a scoundrel, but he kind of means well. Like, you could see he feels really bad when Adolf comes looking for his money and is basically in tears because it was all his money. And he's like, shit, okay, well, how about we hook up for my next one? And he does keep taking advantage of him, but he also genuinely likes him. And that was the dynamic I really liked. I did like the whole bit with the mermaid, though. That was so funny. And there's a couple little side moments during that, like one being that it's pretty clear that Gemma's character has picked a different woman to play the mermaid and he's flirting with her. So you get the sense that he's just sort of like, hey baby, I got a gig if you'd like it, you know, like an acting gig type thing.
I do like in general, when you're watching so many spaghetti westerns in a row, you do start to feel like the fatigue of no new locations. It's still the same fucking main street in town every movie. Yeah. You know, it's you know, the same canyons and the same deserts and the same, you know, ranches and this and that. When you get imagery that you don't expect to see in a western, it is a little bit like, oh, okay, this is kind of unusual. It's like the beginning of Ride the High. What's the Sam Peckinpah movie? Ride the Lonesome Country.
Ride the High Country.
Ride the High Country, where there's like a camel race. at the beginning of the movie or
Yeah,
something like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
and you're just sort of like, a camel? Like,
There's no
oh,
camel.
okay.
Yeah.
That's sort of this when you see the mermaid in a western, you're like, wait a second, okay, I'm on board again. This is interesting and new.
And there's just like a little part of you that's like, is it real? Like, is this a fantasy universe? Just like, because you don't expect the special effects to be that convincing. So like within, there's a part of me that's like, within the logic of this universe, I'm pretty sure that's not a real mermaid and it doesn't look very convincing. But then there's a really cute part where she gets startled and runs away, and Ador's character has not know. He's like the one person. He's seen her, he's had a conversation with her. There's a whole funny bit where they talk about her as if she's not even in the room, about how would you marry a woman like that? Would you have to like where, and the subtext is, how do you have sex with a mermaid? But they
Right.
don't want to use those words, so they're talking about how would you cuddle them in bed? Would you have to sleep in water, or could they sleep outside on land? And the whole time he doesn't notice it's a fake woman until she gets, or fake mermaid, until she gets up and runs away. And he's like a child. He stops in his rage for a second to be sad that the mermaid isn't real. So the widow who we were just talking about is a Polish actress named Magda Konopka, and she is most famous for being one of Sean Connery's mistresses. And she played, the same year as this, she played a Jekyll and Hyde style mad scientist in a cat suit in the movie adaptation of the comic Satanic. That was with a K, not a C, which is a very, very different role from this, but is still like, they're both kind of sex symbol, different flavors of sex symbol. I thought it was kind of funny.
I have to admit, for this movie, the episodic nature, it really tested my patience.
Yeah, I understand.
And by the time we get I forget the characters' names, but that's just me. I never remember characters' names.
No.
But by the time we get to the scheme where it's like, you're going to be a fire breather,
Yeah.
that was about where I was like, okay, I think I just need this movie to wrap it up. Like,
and it looks like, for some of the fire breathing, it looked like Adorf might not have had a stunt double for a couple of those. And so I'm wondering if they just added that because he knew how to do that. And unfortunately, this is not a movie that's had a nice Blu-ray re-release with special features, and it's not really, it's barely mentioned in any of the 3 or 4 books I talked about in the first, like, it's offhandedly mentioned as being part of a group of funny movies.
So the issue for me with this movie is that I really do find what's his name, Giuliana Gemma.
Yeah.
I really do find him unappealing. I feel like the right, and this is, this is a single film of his I've seen, and he's a movie star, so he's probably had better movies that he's been in and everything. But like, as I was watching this, I was like looking at him, and I'm like, you look like the shitty boyfriend of the girl the hero ends up with in a like 80s skiing movie or something.
Right.
Like, he just looks kind of vacuous and like he's generically handsome.
Yeah, generically handsome is a good way of putting it. Do you remember him at all from Day of Anger? I mean, he's the lead.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
When you said that, I was like, okay, that's that character. It's one of those things. I remember the character, but I did not think about Day of Anger at all as I was watching this.
Well, and in that case, he plays a wretch who becomes a sort of handsome asshole.
Right.
And so he's doing the Cinderella thing. And then in his crime movies in the 70s, after he stopped, he never actually stopped making. He made a Western with Fulci in 77, I want to say. They Died with Their Boots On came out, and it was like 77, and it was like a kind of kids movie, but because Fulci made it, it's still really bloody. But he had a lot of range, and in the crime movies, he's very good at kind of internalized stuff, which is the opposite of what you need for this kind of comedy.
Oh, I see.
So that's where I was kind of coming at it when I said right off the bat, I think he was miscast. I think that they were thinking of him as like, oh, this is our Paul Newman. But Paul Newman is like, when he's funny, it's a completely different kind of funny from fucking Terrence Hill,
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't think it worked.
I think of Paul Newman as just like fucking charismatic as hell and sexy, and like, he's funny because he's just so charming or whatever, and I just don't see the charm here.
Well, Gemma, do you remember Tenebrae at all?
No, I do not. That is
Okay.
definitely a movie I've seen 3 times and remember
can't
nothing
remember.
about. It's
He's
just
the-
not my favorite movie.
He's the cop who gets clobbered at the end with the famous shot where the killer is standing behind him when he leans over to pick something up. He's an interesting actor, but he like I wouldn't recommend his earlier the Ringo movies. I wouldn't really recommend them to people who aren't really into exploring the entirety of spaghetti western, like not the entirety of spaghetti westerns as in every film, because that would kill you, but like the entirety of the arc of spaghetti western, just because
Sure.
they're good, but they're so similar. They're both basically Yojimbo again, and so there's not a lot to stand out. So I am someone who came from where you're coming from, where I didn't have much interest in him as an actor, who's learned to like him. And I do think that him and Adolf do have really adorable chemistry. And there's part of me that wishes the movie ended with them, because the ultimate thing is Adolf has this land he is inherited, and the whole journey is supposed to be them going to this land and remaking it, and they're basically going to become like a platonic married couple and
Well,
stay on this land.
It's George and Lenny because they're taking care of rabbits.
That's true.
It's
Yeah.
of mice and men of all
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. and it's like it would just be a nice ending, and then like it does that thing where you're like, oh, it's not going to end here, is it? We've had these villains running around the whole time, and then they're like, well, we need to introduce an even worse villain. So here's the other villain's dad, and he's played by British character actor Anthony Dawson, the original Blofeld. And they're going to torture and threaten to rape the mermaid woman for information, and then kill her in cold blood. And it's just like, fuck, dude. I was enjoying these sweet men and their little farm. And I don't know. I just imagine I always like, what would it be like seeing this in the theater? And would I be bored? Would I be excited? I would be like, is this, because I don't think, I guess there are a lot of these movies that have tonal whiplash. So maybe there, I mean, I'll also say the third act, even though it is from a different movie, the action's fine.
Typically, the way I think about a movie like this, which is basically a con man comedy, is basically it's like a buddy comedy about
Yeah.
2 con men who go through different schemes. What I would imagine the way you would traditionally structure a movie like this is like, well, you get to know them through the first couple schemes they do, and then they stumble upon like, oh, here's the big plan. And then the rest of the movie is dedicated to this like one big plan, and then how it gets complicated and gets out of hand and this and that. And then at the end, they're all friends again. Yeah. But like this movie, it's just so episodic. It just relentlessly anti-momentum.
I had myself convinced that it was based on a comic strip, in part because of that.
Yeah,
and I looked, and it's not, but it feels like a little bit like, and in today's adventure,
this is one of those things that I don't think people who are younger than us can relate to, but people our age, like, we would buy these omnibus things where it's like, you like Garfield? Here's fucking 130 Garfield comic strips in a book.
Yeah, that's what all I ever read on the toilet as a child.
Yeah, I read a lot of these as a kid, and the thing about those is they collect newspaper comic strips sequentially into like one edition. And most newspaper comic strips are not particularly interested in serialized storytelling, but they would do a thing where it's like, we have 3 comic strips in a row on a theme, which is like, John got a trumpet, and then Garfield has to figure out how to get rid of this trumpet because he hates when John plays the trumpet. And so you'd read like 4 or 5 comic strips in a row about John and this goddamn trumpet, and then he'd get rid of it.
I don't think this is a real strip, but
no, it isn't. But I had to.
Oh,
I had to pull an example out of my ass.
doesn't like he has ghostwriters now? Maybe this is your job. You need to look into this, man.
Please, Jim Davis estate. Jim Davis might still be alive. But
he's still alive, but he doesn't do them anymore.
I really can do this job. I am I promise you, I'm 100%
John
qualified.
and the trumpet.
I'm
the epic of John and his trumpet.
To write Garfield comic strips. I'm not qualified for much in this life, but I bet I could do at least as good a job as like 70% of Garfield comic strips that exist. At any rate, when you would read these omnibuses, you would like get the sense of like a bunch of little mini arcs, but it wasn't like any of the comic strips were designed to like ultimately end up in a book. So you would like just get to the end of the book and that would be the end, and you'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I guess I've run out of Garfield.
Yeah.
And that is kind of when I'm watching this movie, I'm just sort of like, and then they run out of bits, and then there's a shootout, and then it's over.
And that's the thing for me, is I'd rather it just you ran out of Garfield than, oh, and there's also bloodthirsty murderers.
Yeah.
It's still sweet though, because Gemma's character's like, well, the farm blew up and this was my fault, so I gotta leave. And the other guy won't let him go away because he loves him. And a lot of it is Adolf is really good in the role. I think I really enjoy him as this sort of teddy bear man. And so when he's like, no, you're not leaving without me, I had a swell in my heart. Again, this was after watching Blackjack, which is a movie that makes you feel kind of bad. I don't know. Maybe it's because I had never seen this one. This is one of the like 3 movies we watched that I wasn't already familiar with.
So you were just bowled over by the novelty of
yeah
not rewatching one of these.
Yeah, and well, and I'm going to speak some about novelty in a second here. I just want to say that Petroni wasn't a particularly prolific filmmaker, but he did make 2 really great westerns in Death Rides a Horse, which is almost the same movie as Day of Anger, but with I think I already talked about this in the other episode. It's Day of Anger, but with the Van Cleef character making a violent youth a better person instead of the other way around. And then he made Tepepa, which is a really fantastic Zapata Western that has Thomas Millian and a very gruff Orson Welles who hated the experience. And then he made another one called The Life is Tough, A Providence, which I have not seen, and it's a straight comedy. Unless you have something, I was going to move on to not the next movie, but what this movie became, unless you have another thought here.
Not really. I mean, I don't. You tell me, because when I started this endeavor, I was not any kind of expert on spaghetti westerns. I had seen less than 10, probably, and so I had an idea of like spaghetti westerns are their own subgenre, and all spaghetti westerns more or less resemble each other. And then when I watched this, I was like, oh, this is very different than a lot of spaghetti westerns because it is so comedic front right. Like, how many of these spaghetti westerns are comedic?
Well, that's the thing, is that very soon after this, they all become comedic. It's just like it gets bowled over. You have a couple more Leone films, and every once in a while, like something sort of more experimental, like Keoma or whatever, The Man Called Blade, or Four of the Apocalypse, the Fulci movie. But for the most part, it just becomes really annoying comedies that are the same shit over and over and over again. So this movie actually feels like a good version of what became, like, it feels a little bit ahead of its time. It wasn't the first, obviously there are other comedies already at this point, but it really goes into overdrive probably 1970-71. That's part of what's interesting about covering this one year, is that this year, despite not having the best movies in the genre, it has the sort of splintering of subgenres all kind of like really coming to a head already. Like the Zapata westerns and the comedy westerns and the revenge westerns are kind of becoming a separate thing. But another reason I wanted to pick this movie is because it had a interesting second life, serving as the movie within a movie for a 1978 meta TV murder mystery directed by Giuliano. Oh boy. It's my eyes this time. Montaldo, called Closed Circuit. And that was just released last year by Severin. And they just had it on sale for like $7. So I picked it up because I remembered we were going to do this podcast. And that is a movie about a gunshot murder that occurs in a theater during a screening of Stars for a Roof. Even though the marquee says Day of Anger, there's like a sort of offhanded comment of like, oh no, that movie hasn't arrived yet, we have to show this other unnamed movie. And to solve the crime, because it doesn't make any sense, the police make everybody stay in their seats and they rerun the film. And again, during the final shootout, which was actually a scene Gemma shot separately, it's not a scene from the movie. They needed a scene they could replay. There's a shootout, and again, during the shootout, someone in the audience dies in the exact same seat. And then it happens a third time, and it sort of builds, and I don't want to spoil it because it's so weird that I mean, I guess people could guess what's happening, but it was really interesting, well done. I really enjoyed it. I don't know if it's sort of like a drawing room mystery that gets really surrealistic and has all these interesting character dynamics, and the detectives are suspecting people because they have secrets. So there's like a couple who's there as part of an extramarital affair, so they can't say who they really are. And there's a gay man who's there cruising, and he refuses to cooperate because he doesn't want to be outed. And then the what's the polite word for the young man who is being cruised? The twink that he's cruising also doesn't want to say anything because he's, would get arrested for it. And so they're on, so it feels like at first it's going to be, oh, this is like, there's an actual mystery at hand here, but it like slowly turns into something else. It's almost like Demons without the horror, is and a little smarter than Demons. I don't think I've ever seen it come up in conversations as having had any effect on Demons. Like I said, it was made for TV. I could imagine Dario Argento and Lamberto Bava had seen it. It is really cool, and it made me like the movie better because you don't need to have actually seen Stars for a Roof because it's just sort of background noise for most of it. So the next one is If You Meet Sartana, Pray for Your Death. This is directed by Gianfranco Parolini, who again wasn't really prolific by Italian industry standards, but did work in everything: the Eurospy, the Peplum, the Superhero, the Macaroni Combat. And he made, I think I counted 6 spaghetti westerns. He's usually credited as Frank Kramer. This movie's Italian title is
Se incontri Sartana, prega per la tua morte.
And it is probably going to be our most, assuming anybody's listening to this for non-educational purposes who is already a fan of spaghetti westerns and is just listening to it because they want to listen to a thing about spaghetti westerns, this probably be our most controversial retrospective, because this is often considered a vital piece of the canon. And I don't think either of us really like this movie very much.
No, I hate this. I've seen this twice now because I rented this totally sight unseen from Scarecrow Video through their like rent by mail service like 4 months ago or something. And I was just sort of looking like, all right, what are some spaghetti westerns that are on Blu-ray that have good reputations? And I thought this movie was so boring, and a second watch did not help.
I've watched it now 3 times, and I liked it a little more the third time. Well, I'll start off with the basics. I would sum up the plot, but it's so fucking convoluted. Here, I'll see what Letterboxd says. After a stagecoach is robbed and the passengers murdered, a long and tangled series of surprise attacks and murders and double crosses leaves the coach's strongbox in the hands of the killer Lasky. It is up to legendary hero Sartana to track down the missing money and determine just who is ultimately behind the grisly robberies and killings. I'll start off on a good note. The idea behind this movie, I don't know if anybody's ever verified this, but everybody assumes, is that this was not only an attempt to try to make a movie around the Colonel Mortimer character that Lee Van Cleef plays in For a Few Dollars More, with his sort of look. The lead here is Gianni Garco, who is another one of these guys who is in a lot of these movies. Garco's look is very similar to Van Cleef's in that movie, and he has all these themed weapons, which is something that Van Cleef's character has. But it's also kind of a little bit James Bondy is what you get. A lot of people say, oh, it's like 007 of these movies, which is giving it a little too much credit, but it does have a certain degree of espionage in that it is a million double crosses in order, and you have no idea who's double crossing who and who's in charge of what. And again, the gadgets that he has reminds people of M in the Bond movie.
My notes say he's got a little tiny gun that shoots little tiny bullets.
And like the one of the reveals is it looks like it shoots 4 bullets, but it actually shoots 5.
This
Wow.
this is one of the James Bond things, though. Is like they have to keep finding new ways for James Bond to have a tiny, dainty little gun.
Yeah, yeah. This convoluted plot was written by Ernesto Gastaldi, who is probably the most prolific writer of any Italian genre or exploitation movies during this era. He worked on everything. Basically, if you think of it, something famous, he probably worked on it. And if his name isn't on the credits, it was probably because he just wasn't credited. And this was for whatever reason. And I think it's just because it's so violent and so this okay. My point is this was a super popular movie. And I think I'm trying to figure out why. I think the idea is that this is the kind of movie that you could go to at a matinee and get up and get, a new plate of spaghetti and come back, and it doesn't matter that you missed part of the plot because the 13 people have double crossed each other in the time you were away, and there's no way you were going to be able to follow it anyway. But you'll get to see Sartana shoot 5 guys again. If you take a bathroom break, well, you're sure enough going to see him shoot 5 more guys.
I mean, I will say, like, there are a fair amount of these movies we've talked about that are shot very plainly and that like are kind of uninteresting in as far as direction goes. And I do think this movie is nice looking. I think it's shot well. I think like the way things are staged is good. But for me, it's like I'm spending the first 10, 15 minutes of any given one of these movies just trying to be like, okay, what is the story you are telling me? And at the end of 15 minutes with If You Meet Sartana, Pray for Your Death, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't fucking know. You just had an ambush, and then you had the ambush get ambushed, and then a third person shows up, and then the same scene plays again, but somewhere else. And there's a blonde guy, but there's a different blonde guy, and I'm not sure which blonde guy was the blonde guy from the other scene. This is one of those movies where, like, about 40 minutes in, I'm just sort of waiting for it to end because no new information is registering for me because I'm so fucking lost.
It's like watching it's like being an adult and watching a cartoon with a child that you don't know what the plot is of this series of cartoons, and you're just being loaded with information at an amazing clip because they only have 22 minutes between with the commercial breaks. It's very overwhelming and not it does look nice, and I think if you're ready for it to overwhelm you, it's just like enough stuff happening that it's kind of interesting. I made some notes about other stuff it has in common, and one of the other things it makes it a sort of pale imitation of For a Few Dollars More is that Sartana also has a music box watch.
Right.
um,
That's like
and
the big thing.
and but the thing is that Captain Mortimer's watch is a super important part of his character because it belonged to his sister who was murdered, and the whole reveal that Eastwood's character figures out their connection is really like probably one of the I think we talked about it last. I think it's one of a very small number of really good emotional reveals in a spaghetti western. And in this one, he literally just finds it on the dead body, and it clearly belongs to somebody because he uses it to tease blonde villain number one a lot. But it doesn't make him. He's not any more evil of a character. He's teasing this guy, and he's not any more of a victim of a character because the watch has no meaning to him beyond.
It's supposed to be like a telltale heart sort of a thing where the
Yeah.
sound of the watch is like haunting this guy of his past crimes.
It's just one of those. Yeah, it's when you're mimicking something that works so well and you're just taking parts from it. It goes back to the whole prequelitis where you have to tell the story of how the character found the baseball bat that they use in the other movie. It's just sort of like picking up stuff that happens because it's something familiar. Apparently, I've never seen this movie. There's a movie called $1,000 on Black, and is sometimes known as Blood at Sundown, that Garco plays a character named Sartana and a supporting role in that movie. And he was so popular that the German version of the film was renamed Sartana. So this sort of formless project was sold to German investors, and they wanted it to be the next Sartana adventure. I'm guessing that the script was not supposed to be a sort of hero. Like they weren't trying to make a new Django in this case, and that's what ended up happening. Just like we talk about all the millions of movies that got retitled Django or Trinity, there were a bunch of sequels to this. 3 of them that were official that had Garco in it, which is actually kind of unusual. One that's considered official but has a different actor, and then all these unofficial sequels, including 2 where Django and Sartana supposedly meet and team up, which are Django defies Sartana, and in one damn day, Django meets Sartana. And then there's also a story called Django and Sartana Are Coming. It's the End. These are 3 different movies, and 2 of them are from the same director. And they were all released in 1970. That's what we're dealing with. And when you talk about Italian film fads, you got 2 names, not even characters, but names that are popular. It'd be like Spider-Man was popular and Batman was popular. And then a smaller studio and director made 3 Spider-Man versus Batman movies with no permission granted. About
The other thing is sort of like you look at it, it's like, all right, well, what's the difference between Sartana and Django? Really, is there
yeah,
these are kind of basically the same character.
Well, and they're both, for one reason or another, supposed to kind of be blank slates. They're supposed to be a little bit like Clint Eastwood's, another kind of blank slate. You kind of project upon him. He just looks cool. And I also wrote down Alex Cox in his review in his book. He spends a lot of time describing the plot in very specific detail, and then he calls it all entirely meaningless. And so I appreciated that he also appears to not like this movie.
All right, well, we're in good company. If the director of Repo Man doesn't like this movie, I feel a little bit better.
I guess what I'd rather talk about here is that the cast is good, and you got Klaus Kinski again, who's doing more of a standard grotesque weirdo bad guy thing than he was in I might keep wanting to say 4 of the Apocalypse, the Ruthless 4.
The Ruthless 4. There we go.
Yeah. He's a different kind of character. But what's great is that someone in the production was like, one creature looking German blonde-haired, blue-eyed villain isn't enough. We should also hire Austrian-born William Berger to play another. Well, I don't know if I'd even consider him the villain. He's an antagonist, I guess. He's kind of the victim half the time. And then Kinski is dubbed by absolutely the wrong man. I don't know if you watched this in English. They gave him a baritone voice, and it's a recognizable voice. He usually dubs the heavies in these movies. And he has so few lines that it's really shocking because he's mostly just watching people. And Kinski does have one bit where he's eavesdropping and not doing a very good job of being subtle about it, which is actually good acting on his part. But then he has like 3 lines and he's like, "Hey, I'm Klaus Kinski." And you're just like, what the fuck? What happened there? And I don't think it's supposed to be funny, and it's just crazy. And then it also has Fernando Sancho, who is he is the go-to for corrupt Mexican generals and bandit leaders during this time. He's in like 7 million spaghetti westerns, playing a guy either named Pancho or Sancho, and he's so typecast that you could consider this a multiverse of Sanchos. He's very good at it, and he's always eating chicken legs. Well, I guess the thing I find kind of interesting about this movie is something I'm not sure I'm supposed to, which is that for most of the movie, Sartana is just sort of pushing Berger's character into doing things and watching what happens. So there's a little, it's just like this touch of like dark comedy to Sartana's basically torturing this guy by setting him up in these double cross situations, and the movie can't pull that off. But that would have been a kind of like dark comedy, like, I don't know, like the thing that's popping into mind is the movie Cable Guy, where someone's just ruining someone's life.
Yeah. I know exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that sort of thing.
Yeah, so like that could work, a Western where the bounty hunter guy is, or I guess he's not even I don't know what Sartana's thing. He's either a bounty hunter or he's like some sort of mercenary, where he's just sort of torturing the antagonist. The Sartana is so ahead of the game the whole movie and so infallible that you half expect him to appear in the coffin at the end of the movie, even though he is opening the coffin at the end of the movie.
Yeah,
You have to
yeah.
expect it to pop open and he's there somehow too. I don't
I
know.
will say, like, if there's a complaint I have about a lot of these spaghetti westerns is I do think a lot of the times the heroes are sort of these like ineffable supermen
Yeah.
that are very
And
boring to me.
this is a definite version of that.
Yeah.
In the sequels, they got more into the ridiculousness of his stuff. And one of them, he turns a church organ into a weapon and rolls it onto the street and plays the organ to kill all the guys in the street during the final showdown, which is a fun image. The second one, because it came in a set from Arrow, so I ended up watching all of them originally. The second one, which is I Am Sartana, Your Angel of Death, that's probably my favorite one because it has a little bit of a John Wick 3 thing where it's a bunch of other bounty hunters trying to get him. Parolini actually made two of these movies. He didn't make any of the Sartana sequels, but then as soon as this was over, he made a different Colonel Mortimer pseudo spinoff called Sabata, and actually got Van Cleef to play the role of Sabata. So there were these two separate, and there's two sequels to that, but only one of them's really a sequel, Return to Sabata, which I actually highly recommend. Return to Sabata, that's a good one. But it was just kind of funny that there were these two competing pseudo Colonel Mortimer projects going on at one time. I thought the score has a little bit of British invasion sound to it. Piero Piccioni. And the only other note I have is that Parolini, his last Western was in 1975. It's called God's Gun, and it's very weird. And it features, I think I mentioned it in a little bit in the other one, Lee Van Cleef as twins. One is a gunfighter and one is a priest. Jack Palance as another, loud villain. And then Sybil Danning and Leif Garrett. And it was produced by Canon Films, an early version of Canon Films before they were using Canon Films.
God damn.
Yeah.
That's
Not a very good movie, but it's kind of worth it, kind of worth it. Anything else you got for this?
No.
All right.
This
Moving
is
on.
one of those movies where I'm like, I got no thoughts about this. I
You-
walked
I
out of
never
it the same
have
way
to
I walked
watch it
in.
again. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now we're going to move on to a very good one. Run, Man, Run.
Holy shit.
The Italian title is
Corri uomo corri.
This is directed by the fourth most famous Sergio Sollima, behind Sergio Leone, Sergio Corbucci, and Sergio Martino. He was the most politically minded of the Sergios, even though we're going to eventually talk about Sergio Corbucci and Sergio Leone's politics in the last episode here. But he fought in the Italian resistance army during World War II. So he's like an actual Antifa warrior, or was an actual Antifa warrior. Like he like as literal as you can get for anti-fascist. He was one of those.
And it shows.
Yeah. And so, yeah, we mentioned Zapata Westerns earlier, but Sollima is a very important figure in the genre. And so I'm gonna do a quick run through more specific of what Zapata Western means. So let me loosen up here. Because of their nihilistic, kind of anarchic rock and roll slants, the Leone and Corbucci films were all considered political in nature. But the bulk of these weren't outright political. They were still about recreating a tone and aesthetic of Hollywood Westerns. And their most potent political statements were usually tied to the fact that they were Italian versions of revisionist Westerns. So it was definitely about, the idea of the West being not the thing that we thought it was in the 30s through the 50s. Zapata Westerns made the politics the point. And there are two films that kicked off this sort of implicitly left-wing thing. And those were Damiani's A Bullet for the General and Sollima's The Big Gun Down. And these were practically released on top of each other. I think there was like a week between them. And there's evidence that both were based on the work of screenwriter Salvatore Loriani, but he's not mentioned in Bullet for the General's credits, so I might be incorrect there. The word Zapata Western comes for Emiliano Zapata, the famed Mexican revolutionary general who fought alongside Pancho Villa and still inspires real-world Mexican politics to this day. most notably the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, the Ejército Zapatistas de Liberación Nacional, the EZLN. Zapata Westerns were set mainly during the Mexican Revolution, and they utilized this historical conflict as an allegory for then modern, 60s, 70s left-leaning political things. And these were card-carrying communist filmmakers. We're not like saying, oh, these guys were woke, these guys were, ahead of their time, these guys were this, that, these were actual practicing communists who made a lot of these movies. And it wasn't like a fad to them. This is what they were here for, and they were trying to squeeze as much of this stuff into these very quickly made fads. And they ended up also, most of these guys ended up making a lot of poliziotteschi cop movies with the same kind of idea. And we were in the early stages of a little thing called the Years of Lead, which I believe I mentioned earlier too. And this was a sort of borderline civil war between hard right and hard left agents within the country. And that's the simple version. But in the late 60s, mid 70s, into maybe even the 80s, I think, the Italian public was freaked out. And there was a lot of crime, and there was a lot of terrorist action, and there were assassinations and assassination attempts, and it was crazy. And then on a sort of technical level, the Zapata Westerns tended to revolve around a pair of unlikely protagonists that are forced to pool their resources and combat a greater evil. And this is because this is what happens in the Big Gun Down and Bullet for the General. We should also mention that the use of the Mexican Revolution as a proxy for modern politics was actually lifted from vaguely anti-communist Hollywood movies like Veracruz and Viva Zapata. And so the movie that is important to Run Man Run is The Big Gun Down, which is another case of an earlier mentor Western, like we were saying, because Lee Van Cleef plays a guy who hooks up with Thomas Milian, who is a bandit. Lee Van Cleef is a bounty hunter who is he's being courted for political office, and he ends up in this situation where these two guys who feel like they have nothing in common end up recognizing horrors of the Mexican Revolution was causing it. This movie is a sequel to that, but without Van Cleef's participation. It's just about the Tomas Milian character. With that in mind, so sorry about all that preamble.
I will just start off by saying I don't think this movie is as communist as it is anarchist.
Yes, and I think that actually by this time, and this is something I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert about, but you have people like Gian Maria Volante, who plays the villains in both Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. He's also in A Bullet for the General. He is an anarchist at this point. And so you have him hooking up with French filmmakers and making weird experimental things, and then coming back to Italy to participate in these kind of movies. So you're absolutely on track with the idea.
There is a specific scene that I believe is taken from Emma Goldman.
Oh, okay.
Where with the Salvation Army.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe basically the Salvation Army is like, if you listen to us preach, then we will give you food.
Yeah.
And Thomas Milan stands up and is like, no, take the bread. Don't wait for the bread. Don't ask for bread. Take the bread, which is a famous Emma Goldman quote. Ask for work. If they don't give you work, ask for bread. If they don't give you bread, take the bread. Yeah. And so like, I think there are things happening here, specifically the way that every single institution at play here is suspect and fallible. There are certain things about theft and the concept of what does and doesn't constitute theft, where like Thomas Milan steals money in the saloon to take a bet for this like gunfight that's happening in the saloon. And then when he wins the money, he puts the money that he stole, that was like sort of the basis of his bet, he puts that back. So it's like,
yeah,
he earned the money that he won, and he doesn't want to steal from someone else. And so there's just like a lot of things going on here. about like what you are entitled to and what you work for, and like what you trust and distrust and things like that, that make it, while being, I think, a very fun adventure movie about like this vagabond character, in the way that, like, again, the typical spaghetti western protagonist of this sort of like ineffable fucking Superman who is the best at shooting people in the head. Like the fact that he is like constantly getting into trouble and or getting like tied to a windmill or crazy shit like that, and just like barely scraping by. He is this like really lovable underdog, and he exists in almost entirely on the outskirts of society and has no interest in being a part of society in a way that makes him a really good anarchist hero.
So we'll talk about Milian. He was up and coming at the time, and he would have, but he became maybe the biggest star of all these stars. Like his output got to the point where it was gross. Like he just started playing these awful cop comedies that were sort of based on Serpico, but became just the dumber and dumber things. He was putting out like several a year. It was really sad, but he was pretty new to the scene. He's from Cuba. He was trained in America. He was in the what do you call it? Actors studio trained, and he was in a movie called The Bounty Killer, which is a very generic name. It's Eugenio Martino, and it's really underrated and very good if you can find that one. The idea behind this character of Cochillo, he sort of based it, he said, on Toshihiro Mifune in Seven Samurai, the sort of enthusiastic bumpkin, and you know, who is also sort of a accidental revolutionary character because of who he is as a peasant and what he says to the samurai about their standing. So you can see that. It sort of led to a character trope of a fool or a peon that becomes more of a comedy thing. It still exists in other Zapata westerns, and he played it. I mean, he's sort of that character in Face to Face, which I think I want to talk about a little bit later in this particular conversation. Face to Face and Tepepa, which I mentioned earlier. He's kind of the same guy, and in Compañeros,
Which is the one that I've seen. So that was
Yeah.
definitely what came to mind for me.
And that's kind of the last in the line there, I think. Compañeros, we'll talk more when we talk about the mercenary, but the Compañeros kind of feels like an apex of a certain kind of character that he played, and it was sort of downhill from there, in my opinion. A lot of people like his cop movies. I'm not a huge fan, but he was just he was a genuinely good actor who was very well trained, but he didn't have a huge amount of ego like a lot of other well-trained actors were when they made it to Italy, and would think that they knew better than the filmmakers. And I think that this movie, you would have not seen The Big Gun Down, correct? You did
That's
not.
right.
Okay, so I think most people our age, or you know, we're a little, you know, around our age, actually did see this movie first because it was part of a Anchor Bay spaghetti western collection with Texas Adios, Caballeros for the Apocalypse. It wasn't until much later, I don't know what The Big Gun Down has, some sort of complex rights issue, but it wasn't available until Blu-ray from Grindhouse, which was much later. So this is actually the movie most people are familiar with, and I don't think you need to know it's a sequel. Most of the characters that are introduced are not. For instance, his fiance, she's not a character in the other movie. They imply that she might have been, but she's definitely not. This one, it was not made for American release, was another thing, because Lee Van Cleef wasn't in it. So they don't, you know, Big Gun Down kind of has to water down some of its politics. And this one puts them so front and center that it's the opening title theme is like a revolutionary song in Spanish. And there's this like the titles play over this really striking piece of artwork of like the revolution. And they keep flashing this this piece of a newspaper that is actually sort of a MacGuffin. It's like just like a treasure map. That's like the basic story, is that everybody's trying to find this treasure, and everybody has a different, like, you know, some people want to use it for the revolution, some people want to use it for themselves, some people want to use it to keep their power over the revolution. But it doesn't really, it's a MacGuffin. It doesn't really matter.
The idea that the gold that they are all looking for is in fact a printing press, that they made a printing press out of gold and then painted it to be
Yes.
to look like it's cast iron, is another like sort of idea of this is a movie that's genuinely interested in what has revolutionary power. And to some extent, that is like if you can get a bunch of people working on the same side and they all have guns, that there's some revolutionary power to that. But also like the main guy that he saves, who sort of gets him into this whole mess, is a poet. And it's his ability to sort of speak to the beauty of Mexico and speak to the Mexican people that energizes them and keeps the revolution going, which is, and eventually he even dies because he takes a bullet trying to protect a woman when these bandits are trying to force him to tell where the treasure is. And like the idea of ideas are powerful does not really exist inside of a spaghetti Western very much.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely part of some of the movies that followed, and of Bullet for the General is the more, because it has such a morally ambiguous ending. But the printing press thing is just this great metaphor. It just kicks you in the balls, like, do you get it, motherfucker? and they actually they have some great, very obvious metaphors in this one. Another one, there's two surprisingly strong female parts. There's the Salvation Army sergeant Penny Bannington, who you discussed before, and she's Linda Veris. She was a holdover before this. Between The Big Gun Down and Run Man Run, Sollima made Face to Face, and he saved a bunch of people from that movie. She hires him to go along with her, and he's just a bumpkin, so he goes along. And the funny thing is it's just an actress known for her sex appeal, and she sort of becomes the comic relief instead of the sex appeal. She represents, because once she finds out about the gold, she's like, oh, by the way, my dad's the mayor, and maybe you should give us the gold so that we can remain richer, and then you can come live with us. And like suddenly now sex is she's like, her ideals go out the window.
She uses the fact that she's a beautiful woman to sort of manipulate people.
Right.
she's like, I'm very chaste. I'm so Christian. None of like the idea of earthly pleasures like sex is totally not anything I'd ever be interested in. By the way, I will give you a whiff of sex every moment I can in order to get you to do what I want.
And then meanwhile, he has this fiance who's very loud and just wants him to come home.
I love her. She's so fucking funny. Who's the actor who plays her?
She's played by Chio Alonso, and she has a bit part in The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. I believe she is the wife of the guy that Angel Eyes kills at the beginning of the movie. You only see her for like a second, or like
okay.
But she's very funny, and she's kind of fulfilling a stereotype of this like nagging, like, why won't you marry me type. But she is more savvy than a lot of the characters, and there's this great part where she sort of sells him out, but it's because she misunderstands the situation. But she sells him out for $1,000 because that's enough to buy a house. She doesn't care about the rest of the gold. She just wants him to come home and them to buy a house. So his choice between this blonde Christian white woman who is already rich and just wants more riches and power, and this salt of the earth Mexican woman who loves him and just wants the bare essentials, is another very heavy-handed metaphor that comes in later as the movie goes on. And also, I want to say that there's a genuine cat fight between these two sexy women, but they don't lose any of their clothing, and the whole time Melion himself is almost naked because he keeps getting captured and tortured for information, and every time it happens he gets more of his clothing torn.
This is kind of why when she sells him out to those two French mercenaries, you're like, okay, no, I get it though, because he is a fuck up. Like, she just knows, she's like, I'm in love with a fuck up, and sometimes you got to save a fuck up from themselves.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, the whole movie, it's like he is this like, he is just constantly right on the verge of getting a bullet in the head.
I do love what you mentioned, the bit where he has been tied to a windmill.
It's incredible.
Whipped as he goes around.
It's so good.
I think I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's the best crucifixion in any of these movies we watched. And I think
100%.
between the 15 movies, I think there's 8 crucifixions throughout. It might be more. I imported the Blu-ray just for this, and there's a conversation with Stephen Thrower, the critic, who is Lucio Fulci's biographer, basically. And so he talks about Milian as this like torture object in the movie Beatrice Cenci, where he's also nude and being tortured, and how he thinks that Milian loved the idea of being the sex symbol of the movie instead of the women who were in it. And it's kind of both cases that happens. And he's also tortured in a very Baroque way in Django Kill, where he's crucified and bitten by vampire bats. And so it's just like, I don't know, Milian, he's just an interesting dude. And he's got like this everything about him is just cool. It's too bad he got annoying later in his career, but and then they do something like it's a holdover from Big Gun Down, where he is a knife thrower instead of a gun shooter. So both movies end in a showdown where it's his throwing knife versus a shooting gun. And that's just a cool thing, and he's really proud of that. He talks about it in one of the interviews on the DVD. He's like really proud of the idea that his guy was the knife thrower guy.
Again, it's like he's surviving on the outside of society. He's surviving using only his wits. He can't afford a gun. He's so poor, and he's so just on the verge of starvation all the time, and he's constantly just like hovering on the edge of everything. The idea of like pairing him with like the technology of war is like no. This is the anarchist hero. He exists outside of all of your little conventions. And then the other thing about him is that he is such a good actor that this is the movie about pairing him with different people. There's him with the poet. There's him with this sort of mysterious stranger who keeps popping up in and out of his life, this former sheriff. There's him with his wife. There's him with the Salvation Army lady. He has great chemistry with all of these people. You really do believe, despite the fact that he is this untrustworthy scoundrel who constantly lies, cheats, and steals in order to get what he wants, you do still believe that he actually has personal relationships with all of these people. And it's what keeps him likable and even lovable.
Well, and I think two of the things you just said there are interesting in the wider picture here, because the revolutionary poet character is I believe the same basic peasant peon gentle intellectual dynamic. It also appears in Compañeros, where a greedy revolutionary and a gringo mercenary are forced to team up with a peaceful counter-revolutionary professor who is a hyper anti-violent guy. And there's scenes in that movie where he keeps stopping to appreciate nature and talk about nature. And at the end of that movie, the gold, quote unquote, is also information. And then this is the second time Sollima himself is using it, because in Face to Face, which again also stars Milian and was also co-written by Sergio Donati, who wrote this one. That's a darker take on this basic idea, where a true believer revolutionary, played by Milian, kidnaps and befriends a peace-loving liberal college professor, played by anarchist and Fistful of Dollars star Gian Maria Volanti, who slowly comes to believe that violence is the only real answer and eventually becomes more brutal and shocking to Milian's character. And it's a really cynical, misanthropic Zapata Western. I highly recommend it, but it is a fucking bummer. But the idea that this is a thing that appears in at least 3 of these movies, I'm sure I can think up another one if I really try. I think that's really interesting. And then the character, the Donald O'Brien sort of sheriff turned bounty hunter, like he's this down of his luck, like guy who needs to make the right choice. You might recognize him as the titular Dr. Butcher MD a couple years, about 10 years after this. But I have a feeling that that character was going to be Van Cleef again, because there's a lot of this stuff about him and his relationship with Milian's character that they already know each other. And there is an indication that Van Cleef's character would go back to being a bounty hunter from becoming a sort of sheriff character. But I get the feeling that when Van Cleef wasn't available, that they changed it to make him more downtrodden, which makes it a more interesting character. I think Van Cleef is a better actor than Donald O'Brien, but it becomes interesting, especially in the scene where O'Brien decides, you need to help these people and we have to be the bait. And he convinces Cuchillo of this and tells the Salvation Army lady to leave, and then tries to ditch them on top of that. Is like it's just good stuff. This, like you were saying, the cynicism that the movie has towards every character and what they're really out for. And he does have the best line in the movie, which is, "I never would have shot you in cold blood. Thanks for warming it up for me."
That's a fucking baller line.
Should also mention that cuchillo actually literally means knife, but cochillo means suckling pig. And I just have to assume there was some sort of word play there that it's too close. Two words that mean completely different things, both of which one could be a name because he uses knives, and one could be an insult because of his parasitic nature to society. And then John Ireland, who is a Canadian American actor who's in Red River, Good Fight, The OK Corral. He was working in Italy at the time, but I think this is his only Western. And he's basically a Pancho Villa stand-in who surprisingly doesn't betray anybody. He sticks to his guns, or his morals. That's all I really got. I mean, I think this movie, I hadn't seen it since I got that old Anchor Bay DVD, and I just hadn't watched it because I had watched Big Gun Down so many times, and I was like, oh, I want to get this on Blu-ray. I don't feel like watching a crappy shit ass like peasant quality DVD.
That's for people who beneath you.
Unrelated, but do you want my old DVD? I don't need it anymore.
Yeah, I fucking love peasant slop. Absolutely.
Anyway, I remembered it being long, and I was a little bit like, oh, what if they overdid it? But I don't think it's too long. I don't think it overstays its welcome.
I think it has a good sense of scale and a good scope to it, but it's got momentum.
Yeah.
Which is not true of our next movie.
No. Let's close out this episode with one I just sort of picked because it's very familiar. It had a very good American release, home video and theaters. That is Ace High, which I keep mistakenly calling Aces High.
Right. Which is the
nothing
World
to
War
do.
One fighter pilot movie, or two?
Right. Or in my case, the Iron Maiden song about the Royal Air Force pilot dogfighting during the Battle of Britain. Aces High. This is Ace High.
Yeah.
The sound of the arrow. Yeah, fuck yeah. Wish they had that at karaoke. They never have that one. This is directed by Giuseppe Colizzi, which is a great Italian name. Giuseppe Colizzi. The superior Italian title is
I quattro dell'Ave Maria,
which translates basically to the four gunmen for Ave Maria, which doesn't quite make sense, but has a better ring to it than Ace High.
Yeah, that's kind of badass.
And it's also known as The Revenge at El Paso. This is the second in a loose trilogy that began with God Forgives, I Don't the previous year, and the year after we had Boot Hill. They're all directed by Colizzi, and I have never seen Boot Hill. It's the most readily available, actually. It has some sort of copyright problem, so it's on every single one of those 20 Western classics kind of things that you find at the grocery store. But there's no real reason to worry about. This is
Bud Spencer, big man, looking like a caveman.
Yes, Bud Spencer and Terrence Hill. They play the same characters. I don't know if you got this. Terrence Hill's character's name is Cat Stevens. Did you? And they call him Cat, but I don't think they say his last name in this one.
They wait a long time before that. These are two mysterious figures, basically.
Right, which is ridiculous because they're the guys from the previous movie.
Maybe that's why they're mysterious, because I didn't see the previous movie. So to me, the backstory has not been explained yet.
This is I'm going to get ahead of myself. This is a movie that does not need either of these actors in it.
I don't know. I mean, go ahead and make your case.
All right. Okay, I'm going to go back to that. I got to get the little things out of the way first.
Go ahead.
The thing, the consensus here is that these movies are all kind of mediocre. Ace High is the best one, mostly because it features Eli Wallach.
Good in this movie.
He did not take as big advantage as Lee Van Cleef of his stardom post Good, Bad, and the Ugly. He was in Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Ace High, Tassiari's Long Live Your Death, which is a sort of parody Zapata Western, similar to Companeros. And that one I think is kind of interesting because it features Franco Nero and his future sister-in-law, Lynn Redgrave. And then he was in Sergio Corbucci's The White, the Yellow, and the Black alongside Milian and Gemma. And that sounds cool, Gemma, Milian, and Wallach in a fucking Sergio Corbucci movie, but it is actually a dire comedy that spoofs Red Sun, which is an already borderline racist movie. And Milian plays a really cringy yellow-faced character the whole time. But so those are the only 4 westerns he made. And I think that obviously Good, the Bad, the Ugly is the best of those and the most
Yeah.
memorable of those. But I think this role maybe is a little bit more impressive range as far as acting, because
I would agree.
the character the character he plays in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is pretty one note. He's funny and that he has like different dynamic ranges, but this guy has quite a bit going on. And the idea is that he has been betrayed by partners and has spent 15 years in prison. And if he was the focus of the entire movie, and then we didn't have almost 20 minutes of I keep wanting to call him Trinity, Terrence Hill, not Trinity, of Terrence Hill and Bud Spencer literally farting around. Their horses are, but I think it just would work better if we focus on him and his thing and what he's doing, and then bring these characters in. And then at a certain point, Hill just keeps disappearing. It really is, if anything, Bud Spencer and Eli Wallach are the central characters. The Hill's character will disappear and then reappear in heroic moments. I guess this is pre-Trinity, and of course this was renamed Trinity something something after the Trinity movies came out. But I just that kind of character from him, it's just, I don't know, I don't enjoy it very much, and I don't think it's particularly funny. But then I think Wallach is hilarious. He can even mug. Like I don't like mugging very much. It's part of my problem with what I consider mugging is just making faces, without speaking lines, just
Yeah.
like auga, look at them titties, that kind of stuff.
This is so. Here my argument for why. I'll be honest. I don't think Terrence Hill is good in this. I don't care about Terrence Hill in this movie.
No.
I think he functions as far as like he is the man with no name type, and that is a good foil for Bud Spencer, because Bud Spencer is this like absolutely insanely huge, brutish, like fucking guy who, like, it's a visual gag when he gets a shave and a haircut and ends up in a suit, because it's just sort of like he looks so out of place
D-
being anything
do,
other than this like feral caveman.
do you remember when we in the first episode when we were talking about Beyond the Law, the Lee Van Cleef movie,
Yeah.
how the only factoid, IMDb factoid for that entire movie is Bud Spencer appears clean shaven in this film? It's the
Yeah.
only thing. Yeah. So now you get it. Now you've seen Bud Spencer at
Right.
his best. Now you understand why that was such a big deal.
So Terrence Hill I don't mind in this movie, but he's just
No, he's
sort of
sorry.
he's not much of a character. Bud
No.
Spencer I love in this movie.
Yes.
I think he's funny. And so like if you're gonna have this script that spends so much time with these two, they're specifically like I like that this movie starts off with setting them up as like these crazy badasses, where they just sort of like are very enigmatic and strange, and they walk into this town and they like force their way into this banker's office, and you don't see what happens behind closed doors, but they walk out with a check for money for that, like, because of this convoluted thing of they killed a guy who worked for him and they're going to expose him if whatever. Basically, they force their way into $4,000 that he does not want to give them, which is why he sort of springs Eli Wallach from jail, saying like, well, you're the ultimate killer, so you go kill these guys. Eli Wallach is like, actually, I have a lot more going on than just being a hitman. So
Yeah.
no. But at any rate, like, I like that this movie starts off with those two, with Terrence Hill and Bud Spencer being these like really interesting, enigmatic badasses, and then the rest of the movie is them like fucking falling for like what, like the rest of the movie is Eli Wallach is Roadrunner and they're Wile E. Coyote, and they just like keep falling for dumb Like, they should not fall for this. They should not trust this guy, but he keeps
Yeah.
convincing them to trust him. And
Yeah.
because I just find Bud Spencer so cute, like, it could just be like I'm attracted to Bud Spencer for all, you know what I mean? Like, I just think he's hot and cute, and I just want to cuddle this man. But like, when Eli Wallach then shows up and is constantly double crossing them or triple crossing them or getting on their side or whatever, like, it's so delightful because Eli Wallach is so good that you're rooting for him, but also I think these two showing up as it's the thing from Predator where, like, the first part of Predator is establishing these American military guys as the ultimate badass, and then for the rest of the movie they're prey. It's like that, where it's like the beginning of this movie is like they wander into town and anyone who looks at them funny, they just start punching in the face, and they can beat up a whole town. And then the rest of the movie is them being like, "Oh, come back, Eli Wallach, you're being mean." So I do like them in that sense. But like Eli Wallach, I especially, you want to talk about like a character starts off as one thing and then slowly reveals layers. The fact that they keep falling for his dumb bullshit about like, okay, no, I know. But this time I actually do think we should work together, guys. Like, the fact that keeps happening to them, you kind of buy into it because he himself, like in the first scene, he is this just like silent, brooding man in these really interesting shadows that cross his face as he's in this prison. And you're like, oh my God, what's this guy's past? What has he done? What dark things are going on in his mind? And then when he breaks out of prison, we have this like long sequence of him like trying to figure out like, which boots do I wear? Is this guy's boot? I gotta get some new duds here. These two guys who killed this sheriff who was locking me up, and I killed them, and now, all right, well, I'm free. What does that mean? And it's just sort of like oh, okay, that's this guy. And then the very next scene with him is with the banker, where he gets this like insanely awesome monologue detailing like all the ways this banker fucked him over. And it's like the entire scene is he knows he's going to kill this banker, but he wants to draw it out as long as humanly possible because he wants to, relish the revenge of it. And like you get that angle of him where it's like a little bit sadistic, but it's still very charming and very funny and very disarming because he is still Eli Wallach. He is still the guy from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly who just kind of looks like this weird slob and has this very expressive animated face. Like, for a long time, I was watching Ace High and I was like, yeah, this movie fucking rules. And then the problem is there's no plot.
Yeah. I mean, it's really kind of surprising that there's no plot because it seems like things keep happening, so there should be plot. It's I think comparable to Skyfall's Stars.
Yes, it is. It's very episodic.
And I think the episodic nature works better in the other film's case. This is a better looking movie. I think one of the major advantages here, not just having Wallach, but I assume, I can't find any information because it's one of those movies that people don't really care that much about. But I assume this had to it had some, it was distributed by Paramount, so it had to have some sort of Hollywood interest in it because it's got Wallach, but also Brock Peters, who's most well known for playing Tom Robinson in To Kill a Mockingbird, and he's in the Carmen and Porgy and Bess. He's I know him as playing two different characters in Star Trek original cast movies, and then he was Sisko's dad throughout Deep Space Nine. He's another one who you think, oh, this is a character from the previous film that they're re-meeting with, and no, he's just some guy that he and his wife are traveling circus types.
It's not quite as unusual as a fucking tent with a mermaid in it, but you don't expect to see tightrope walking in the middle of this main street. And it is a little bit like, oh, okay, this movie's doing some weird shit.
Yeah, so he's in it. He was also in, he had been at the time, he was in Major Dundee, the Peckinpah movie, and he was in, it was a multiple Carradines in the movie The McMasters. But I believe it was because he was on Rawhide and Gunsmoke that probably ended up getting him in here, because a lot of the Italian casting directors were pulling from American television because they knew that those guys were affordable. But as far as I can tell, this is his only Italian production he ever made. So it's interesting that they got this American actor of prominence, and then They also got Kevin McCarthy, who name you see in the credits and doesn't show up until the very end. So I was like, maybe it's a different Kevin McCarthy. But he's, most people know as the main character from the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or the guy who cameos in every Joe Dante movie. He's a guy who's in multiple Westerns, so his is a little different. But he also didn't really make any movies in Italy. So the fact that they got those two guys plus Wallach, it's very clear that everybody, all major actors are all speaking English on set because the lip sync is correct, even if the dubbing voices are different. I don't think, Spencer's I don't remember what his real name is, but he's Italian. Him and Hill are both Italians, so they probably have thick accents. But that their effort was put in. I think the dialogue, even if the story and plot the script is bad on those levels, but I think the dialogue is better than you expect from most spaghetti westerns. It's a little crisper, it's a little more naturalistic, it's a little funnier. I think that those actors appearing in it, and the fact that they put more effort into the dubbing, makes me think that this was sort of aimed at American audiences, and that they were trying at least to make this series appeal to American audiences.
This also has the length that I associate with a lot of American movies at this time, where it's like, this movie is important. Why? Because it's over 2 hours long.
And apparently the version we watched, the American cut, is like 15 minutes shorter, and nobody has the original Italian cut available on video. And I don't think I would want to see another 15 minutes. Actually, that's one of my notes I have. Back to your note about his layers. There's this really surrealistic scene where him and Spencer have this heart-to-heart conversation in a room full of hanging baby bassinets.
This is the shit I live for, man. This is like, again, not a great movie, Ace High, but this is why I still like have a fondness for this over some of the other stuff we've talked about, because you are constantly surprised by some of the choices.
It's strange, and I don't even really understand what the context of this room is. If this is like this is what they do at these hotels.
Well, we were talking about, I think it was the Bella Star story. We were talking about the idea of like a heist where there's a fight, but you have to keep quiet to not get caught.
Yeah.
I think like the idea is this is a very tense conversation, but they have to have this conversation in like hushed tones because they're surrounded by sleeping babies.
And I just mean, what is the content? Why are there a bunch of sleeping babies in this room?
Oh, it's a nurse. I don't know, man.
But the best part is that it's a sort of Chekhov's gun moment, because we find out that Wallach, his superpower isn't shooting. Well, he can shoot well too, but it's that he can lull people to sleep by telling them stories. He almost escapes lulling everybody to sleep talking about his childhood.
When he starts telling the story about his great grandfather, and so slowly you realize that the story itself is not the point. The point is that it's putting all the guards to sleep.
Yeah,
it's very funny.
The ending is really, this is a third movie where they design a heist around coming in through the roof.
Yep.
It's not a chimney this time, but the sort of end game, which has very little to do with the rest of the movie, and we're talking about
the part where it all falls apart, because it feels like there's like 3 beats too many in establishing what this casino heist is going to be.
It's like an Ocean's 11 thing, but without really thinking it through to that degree, where this place, the Kevin McCarthy's place, has been rigging the games this whole time. And when Wallach figures that out and they figure out how they're rigging it, they rig it in their favor. And the cool thing that happens is that Wallach purposefully keeps calling the same number on the roulette wheel to show everybody in the room that it's dirty, when the original plan was to just continue winning, and that they would be moving this magnet around the roulette wheel so that he would keep winning. He instead, because he wants revenge on Kevin McCarthy, makes it a big deal. So everybody's like, oh shit, this is rigged, isn't it? This has probably been rigged the whole time. Then it ends with a really cool final like showdown.
Yeah.
And they're going to give Wallach's character the chance to kill McCartney in a shootout. But he says, no, wait, this isn't right. I've imagined this moment for years, and it always has music. And so there's this very sad piano and violin player who are frighteningly playing a waltz and the music gets louder on
Well,
the soundtrack.
what's great is it's not one of those scenes where it's like they're in a crowded casino and then the guns come out and then everybody goes running and then they're alone in the casino. Everybody who was in the casino is sort of just on the floor face down.
Right. Yeah.
And then one of them gets sort of like picked back up to get on the piano and play this waltz. But the rest of them, like as they're doing this like standoff, they're like stepping over the bodies of all these bystanders who are like desperately trying not to get shot. It's really interesting.
And then that adds to the whole dance aspect of it because they're having to step over people. So
there's
like a little extra dance movement to it. Yeah, it's a really good climax. It's basically like a bunch of stuff happening and then like a 35-minute long movie about a casino heist. That's pretty good.
Right.
Kind of the way it feels. I don't love it, but it does have these really good scenes that kind of make it work.
I'll confess, like I don't know a lot about Eli Wallach. Like I've seen this movie and I've seen obviously Good, Bad, and the Ugly. And I've seen The People Next Door, which was like an American new Hollywood movie about drug abuse and stuff like that. And like where he plays the dad, so that's more of a straight character. He's like the dad with these sort of hippie teenage kids. And so like I'll be honest, like Good, Bad, the Ugly, he's incredible in. But when I watched this movie, I was like, oh, I didn't realize Eli Wallach was this good.
Yeah, I think he also trained at the Actors Studio. I might be wrong, but he definitely was a New York actor. He's definitely of that generation. The fun connection here is that both him and McCarthy have roles in John Huston's The Misfits.
Okay.
Which isn't one of my favorite movies, but is a movie that has a very interesting history behind it and some really good performances.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess I know him from Godfather Part 3, unfortunately, and Magnificent Seven, and he's in the treasure hunting underwater thriller. But he makes this movie, and I think that he doesn't just make it, but I think there is a good argument that he is even better in this than he is in The Good, the Bad, the Ugly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's also in The Sentinel. I love The Sentinel. A weird fucking movie.
Okay, well, you can be over there loving The Sentinel.
I love The Sentinel. It's so gross and mean, and
I don't love The Sentinel.
That's all I got for this episode. You got anything to add?
I'm still on this roller coaster with you that you're taking me on, and I'm really enjoying the variety. And I think this is a common thing. This is everything. This isn't even just movies. This is like all death metal sounds the same until you start listening to a lot of death metal, and then you're like, how did I ever think all death metal sounds the same?
Right.
And this is that for spaghetti westerns, where I'm like, all spaghetti westerns are more or less the same kind of movie with a few different elements. And now I'm watching all of these, and I'm like, man, they really go all over the place. Anything can be a western.
Well, we'll have one more part. We pushed back the two, I think, best and most important films, another really good one, and then one that just sort of ended up there. So that one I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Why haven't they talked about Once Upon a Time in the West yet? Stay tuned. We will.
Stay tuned, motherfucker. We're going to have, if you want to watch ahead, Once Upon a Time in the West, The Great Silence, Kill Them and Come Back Alone, that's the mediocre one, and The Mercenary. And if you're at it, might as well watch Compañeros, because we're going to talk about it a lot when we talk about The Mercenary.
True.
Where can they find you, Patrick?
Oh, man, you can find me on genregrinder.com. I have a column called Silver Screams where I write about the horror movies of 25 years ago. All this year, I'm going to be tackling the horror movies of the year 2000, everything from Leprechaun in the Hood to Ginger Snaps to Bloody Murder, The Convent. Scream 3 came out this year. Eventually I'll get onto that. It's really it's a great column if I'm allowed to say so, and I think you should read it.
And he's looking like he's got more shit on the website than I do because I got sick again and I didn't do any reviews this last couple weeks.
That's all right. It's a long time in the works. And then also I am the co-host of a podcast called 96 Greers, where we are watching every feature film with Judy Greer in the cast. Most recently, we watched Love and Other Drugs, which dares to ask the question, what if you had a romantic comedy between a sociopath and someone with a terminal illness?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I do ask that question often.
Okay. Now, third question. What if that movie also was about the dawn of Viagra?
Oh yeah, no, that was yes.
That's
I
Love
already
and Other
had.
Drugs.
Yeah.
It's a
Makes
shit. It's
sense.
a shit movie, but it's got a pretty good Judy Greer performance in it. So we talk
Well,
about that. We talk about all kinds of movies. It's a very good podcast. We watch a lot of bad movies, but it's not a bad movie podcast where we just sort of write our jokes and dunks. We take them seriously and look at the movies in the context in which they came out. So I'm proud of 96 Greers as well, and you should check that out.
okay, and then you can reach me at the Genre Grinder website, at the Genre Grinder Facebook page, on Instagram as Genre Grinder Gabe, on Blue Sky as Gabe Powers, and then in parentheses I put Genre Grinder, on Letterboxd as Gabe Powers. And I forgot last week to thank the Patreon subscribers who are helping me pay for my out-of-pocket expenses to keep the podcast and website going. Thank you guys so much, except for Patrick, who
Except for me. Don't
you know,
deserve it.
at this point, he's basically paying the rent for the space for his column.
That's
is
right.
the way I see it.
That's right. I'm four-walling the single streams.
Yeah. But yeah, stay tuned for part 3 of this. And I think I might squeeze a different podcast in between here that's supposed to be recording at the beginning of March. And until next time, when you do your dramatic shootout, make sure there's a waltz playing, because it really does add to the ambience, and it makes a kind of mediocre sequence really good.
You want your last moments to be without music? You know, George Romero died listening to the soundtrack to The Quiet Man. Speaking of, I don't think that's a Western, but that's a John Wayne movie.
No, it's Western adjacent, we'll say.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's a bummer. All right, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.